If you're one of these people, and there's many in this country who watched that and was disappointed the president wasn't killed, you're not a good person.
I hate hearing that, quote, Bill Maher said. Bill Maher is a moron. This is the part where Trump totally loses me. Guys, up first, we're going to check in with Bill Maher over on HBO. He is a longtime Democrat, very much a hater of President Trump, going back quite some time now. But he's also, while I disagree with him politically on a whole host of things, he's always struck me as somebody who is more reasonable than most when it comes to at least domestic politics, and is not afraid to say stuff just because it's offensive or edgy. And so I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Bill Maher over the years. That's just full transparency. That is where I am coming from. So I will say that's where I start out when I go towards any time he's in the news. Yet also, I just can't help but agree with him. He's making a lot of sense to me. You know, I've been speaking out against political violence for a very long time, and that's not a new thing for me, but I'm really disturbed by the rise in it and the rise in support for it as well. And so is Bill Maher, so much so that he actually scolded a few members of his own audience when they clapped at the idea of President Trump being killed. This all, of course, comes in the context of the latest assassination attempt targeting President Trump, where a gunman, stormed the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Anyway, here is that clip from Bill Maher.
Well, let's get the ugly news about the political violence out of the way first, because we have to talk about it. I'm just going to vomit my take on it, and then you can argue. I would just like to say, if you're one of these people, and there's many in this country who watched that and was disappointed the president wasn't killed, see, they're laughing at that, you're not a good person or a smart person. But definitely not a good person. I was reading this in your paper, interview with Governor Pritzker of Illinois, and they asked him, like, well, what does the next president have to be? And he said, good, decent, and kind, which who can disagree with that? And certainly Trump has often not been good, decent, or kind.
Right,
but he's not Hitler.
You can't say
True.
that you are fighting for democracy or a believer in democracy, and at the same time excuse political violence as a mechanism for political change. It's one or the other. And that's the essence of our system, that it gives us the opportunity to change things through the will of the people and not through the barrel of a gun. And people who don't get that don't understand the basis of the system they are supposedly championing.
And that's right. You look at opinion polls, it's scary how much of a proportion of Gen Z are now saying that they support some form of political violence to express, their opposition. And that's got to change. I mean, that is simply not, as Brett says, the way to build a democracy.
Yeah, I really appreciated this, especially from Bill Maher at the beginning, where he talks about how people are disappointed Trump wasn't killed. And then a couple of members of his own audience start hooting and hollering as if that describes their sentiment. And, maybe those are just people who had a bad day or weren't being totally serious. And I can kind of give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit and suggest that maybe they're not, cold-blooded people who support murder. But regardless, that is a sentiment out there that you see across the internet, and also, in public opinion polling, a kind of disturbing sentiment, actually. A significant percentage of people now supporting political violence. And it's not exclusively the left or young people, but as one of Bill's panelists there points out, it is disproportionately a left-leaning and younger-leaning phenomenon. And that scares me about the future of our country. But Bill does deserve some credit in my book for calling out his own audience here, because that's kind of hard to do. And I guess it proves he gives no Fs when it comes to calling people out and setting them straight and giving them a reality check if that's what they need. Because you're kind of, as any sort of content creator, and people vary how much they adhere to this or pander to this or not. I mean, you're somewhat captive to your audience, right? Your career and your opportunities, they require you to continue to have that audience tune into you and support you. And so when you push back on them or try to tell them something that's not necessarily what they want to hear, that's often what moral courage and intellectual honesty and consistency require, but it's very much not what is incentivized by the market dynamics of the media economy, especially the new media ecosystem. So people become, if anything, incentivized to push further and further into their extremes or to their narrative or to pander more and more to one side. And listen, I just think that Bill is not doing that on this issue. And that's a huge, it really shouldn't be like a huge compliment to him. It should kind of be the bare minimum, but it's unfortunately not. It is not the bare minimum when it comes to what we see from people in this space. And yeah, I guess there's more here. It gets spicy at a couple points in this panel, and then President Trump decided to weigh in. Remember all the panic over the SAVE Act? We talked about it on this show, and many Democratic leaders compared it to Jim Crow 2.0. But it was really just voter ID and proof of citizenship legislation. And unfortunately, it looks unlikely that it'll pass. According to the latest prediction market from our channel partners at Kalshi, there's only a 9.1% chance that it passes before January 4th, 2027. So I guess there's no need for all that hysteria after all. Not that there ever really was. Anyway, Kalshi is the first CFTC-regulated exchange dedicated to trading on the outcome of future events. If you want to check out Kalshi today, use my link or the code BRADP to get $20 free when you place a $20 prediction today. Let's look at this second clip from Bill Maher's latest episode.
One brief additional point, which is that the left, including the hard left, has to learn how to speak about Trump without immediately equating him to Hitler.
I just said that, yes.
You can be bad and not
stole your line.
You can be bad and not Hitler. You can be wrong. You can be a worrying president. At the same time, well, now I'm repeating you. The best way to do it is to argue your case.
Yeah. Once you start with Hitler, it's like anytime you do, we've seen it in many places in the world where they make someone into, whether it's Rwanda or, the Hutus saying the Tutsi were vermin, or the Hutu, somebody was vermin, I remember.
The Tutsis were vermin.
Whatever it was. And then the next, whenever you dehumanize someone to that degree, people go, oh, I'm a hero. This guy wasn't crazy. Like, he wasn't hearing, the dog wasn't talking to him in the moon. He just was like watching, the
social media. Yeah.
Well, the more virtuous you think
and
you are.
And media, yes.
The more virtuous you think you are, the more you have permission to behave diabolically.
That is such a powerful point and line from Bret Stephens here, the New York Times columnist who's on Bill Maher's panel. And I appreciate it because it really is true. Some of the most wicked things you'll see are done in the name of justice, right? They're done by people who think they're the good guys, think that they're fighting the good fight. And it's when you operate with that lack of humility, that idea that truly the bad guys have no points, everything is black and white and simple, that's when on either side you can end up in a really terrible place and end up doing really terrible things. So it's interesting. I had this conversation with a couple people who I had on a panel recently where we were debating is Trump a fascist? Is Trump a Nazi? Are these comparisons overwrought? And I think it is perfectly fine to call out things in particular that Trump does that are authoritarian or are illegal or what have you, but I'm always going to be very skeptical about really any comparison to the Nazis, which of course is not something exclusively like liberals do to Trump. That's one of the biggest examples, but I saw people comparing like COVID vaccine passports to the Nazis, and it's like, okay, while I was against that, it's still not really comparable to the Holocaust. In fact, almost nothing is actually comparable to the Holocaust. So I would say, while there's an exception to every rule, like 99% of the time, that Holocaust comparison that you're about to drop could probably be left undropped. Crazy take, I know. But anyway, the point here is appreciated, and I do think that it is a good idea and important for people to tone down the rhetoric. But I will say that I'm very sympathetic to the liberals and Democrats who say, like, you first, Trump. And he doesn't, right? He's constantly calling people names, including fascist, Marxist, Nazi, communist, traitor, seditionist. He's even calling for people that he doesn't like Democratic senators and members of Congress, to be executed. So he is not taking down the rhetoric, but that's not an excuse for other people to be reckless with their words as well, especially when, at least recently, and in the most high-profile incidents, a lot of the violence does seem to be flowing towards Republican officials. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So I do think people should chill with calling everything Nazi Hitler, because it also has the same effect that we saw with like racism, right? Where everything under the sun was some form of racism and bigotry. And when you cry wolf so many times, people eventually stop running and stop caring that you are yelling wolf. Like, and now we have actual racists, actual neo-Nazis and bigots who have become semi-normalized and semi-influential. And I don't think those phenomenons are unrelated. I actually think one played a huge role in setting the stage for the other. So I appreciate this point, and I totally agree. People need to take down the rhetoric. But the part of this episode of Bill Maher that aired that upset President Trump was when he interviewed California Governor Gavin Newsom, who is, of course, presumably, like he hasn't officially announced it, but we all kind of know that he's planning on it, at least certainly seems to be, running for president in 2028. Well, that interview was not exactly tough. It was a little bit challenging, but mostly friendly, and President Trump did not like it. He had a lot to say on Truth Social, though. First, here's a clip from Gavin Newsom on Bill Maher this week.
Is there anything you're going to say California was too far left on? Because I feel like if you don't, I think a lot of the country is not going to listen.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that, I've said this in the past, things I could have done better.
True.
I look back at COVID, we just put out a detail, over 1,000 pages, what we did right and wrong during COVID as it relates to the issues of outdoor and beaches being shut down, schools being shut down for too long. But we also made the point we had a lower death rate than any other large state, that our economy recovered faster than any other large state, and we had one of the fastest vaccine rollouts in the country. So there's good and bad. And on the issue of housing and homelessness, what we could have done more aggressively sooner. But on social issues, where I think you tend to be leaning in towards, I've made my point of view known as it relates to issues of sports and transports, which I just think it's not being transphobic. To
common sense.
So here's the part where Gavin Newsom just pisses me off, because he's so fake. He's so snake-like, right? He's just constantly remaking himself, where he's suddenly pretending to have seen the light, even though, he enacted these super harsh COVID lockdowns while breaking his own rules. Yes, Gavin, I'm not over the French laundry and you going out to eat. Well, that was against your own rules and getting caught. But more than that, right? Like, he does this fake nod towards moderation on things like the trans issue, where he says it's just a fairness issue, transports, as if he hasn't single-handedly implemented the most radical transgender policies in the entire country in his state under his tenure, which he has, right? They've literally placed in California biologically male sex offenders into women's prisons, where they have gone to harm women inmates. So as well, they have in the school system, they've enshrined transgender athletes who are biologically male being allowed to compete in female sports. So he can come around and say like, oh, I agree there's some points to be had here. And he can do this kind of compromise in rhetoric only type of tactic during interviews. And Bill, bless his heart, did not, he's a liberal, he's a Democrat. He probably has an eye on maybe supporting Gavin Newsom, so maybe he just wasn't looking to do a real tough interview, and I guess that's not his lane anyway, but he really did kind of let him get away with it. Now, that said, people did pick up on this clip and a couple other moments from the Bill Maher episode and circulate it widely, including on Fox News, where they regularly highlight Bill as something of a truth teller, speaking to the left, and also I believe they highlighted this interview with Gavin Newsom and the fact that Newsom kind of hinted about being a little more moderate, but did his usual thing. And that's obviously something that Fox wants to highlight, because they're not fans of Gavin Newsom over there, and I certainly share a number of their critiques. But Trump did not like the coverage that Bill Maher was getting for this. Here's what he wrote on Truth Social. I hate seeing Fox and other conservative outlets constantly making low-rated Bill Maher relevant as it pertains to the Republican Party and beyond. Bill Maher is a weak and ineffective person who I got to know very well during my dinner with him at the White House. He was nervous, scared, and the first words he uttered as he entered the Oval Office were, "Can I have a drink?" It was very endearing, but at the same time, absolutely pathetic. I'll just pause on this and say that if I was going into the Oval Office to meet Donald Trump, I'd probably want a stiff drink too, because that would be intimidating. And listen, I actually don't know what Bill Maher's ratings on HBO itself are, but his clips and his content is very widely viewed online, very widely circulated, and clearly President Trump himself follows it with some interest. So when Trump rage tweets about people, but also claims they're irrelevant and have low ratings, it's like, well, then why are you so bothered by them? Why aren't you just ignoring them? Clearly, they are not, in fact, irrelevant. Anyway, more from his post here. He was much different from what people think, but last night I happened to watch Gavin Newsom, an admittedly low IQ person who said he can't read a speech, is dumb and essentially incompetent, and he took Bill Maher over the coals. Bill Maher was defenseless and totally deficient. Either he didn't have the knowledge or he choked, because Gavin went on and on about how good California is doing while it's doing very poorly, having by far the worst year it's ever had, where for the first time in history more people are leaving than coming. Bill Maher started by saying that California was doing poorly, only to have Newsom speak for an extended period of time and lie about the facts. All you have to do is look at what's happened to LA, San Francisco, the horrendous homeless problem, blah, 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 more here. At the end, he goes, Fox should stop putting this person on. He's not representing us. You look weak, stupid, and ineffective, and I hate seeing that. All caps. Don't use Bill Maher any longer as a representative of you. I hate hearing that, quote, Bill Maher said. Bill Maher is a moron, though slightly more talented than Jimmy Kimmel. That's the end of that long ramble there. And I don't really understand what his point is about Fox News or why they should stop talking about Bill Maher, but this is the part where Trump totally loses me. In him like rambling about people like this, Bill Maher has, of all the leftists to go after or progressives, Bill Maher just doesn't make sense. Like, if anything, from Trump's perspective, Bill Maher has said pretty positive things about his experience meeting Trump and has actually been pretty supportive of Trump's war with Iran. I've actually disagreed with a fair number of Bill's points about that, but it's like, why are you picking these unnecessary battles and fights? And these long late night screeds really I don't think they hit the way that President Trump thinks he hits. I think most people in the country never hear about them or see them, if we're being honest. But then I also think that a lot of people do see them and just roll their eyes and go, Grandpa's rambling on Truth Social again. But I kind of doubt, to be honest, that the Fox News executives are going to be sitting up and taking notice and saying no more segments about Bill Maher because the president might rage tweet again. They're going to be tracking the ratings, and they're going to do more of what works well and less of what does not in terms of people watching. And I know a lot of Fox News viewers, a lot of Trump voters do have something of an interest in what the latest going on with Bill Maher, because like I said, he is that ideologically dissident liberal. He is that guy pushing back on his own side or questioning people or going after kind of heterodox thinking on his own side of the political aisle. And people appreciate that. So that tends to be something you see this with progressives and liberals highlighting dissident conservatives or anti-Trump Republicans. That's very much a popular phenomenon. And Trump rage tweeting about it doesn't really change that. And also, it's like Bill Maher is one of the most prominent people on the left trying to take down the temperature and speak out against political violence. Maybe we could just give him the W for that and like not criticize him for not being tough enough on Gavin Newsom. Like, couldn't you just highlight that and say that you appreciate that? But I know. I'm just asking too much from President Trump there. But what do you guys think? I found the latest going on with Bill Maher to be interesting, for sure.